I'll try to leave the last 5 to 10 minutes for questions and answers. And also please do stay tuned till the end of this webinar. If you're watching it live or if you're watching at your own time, please do complete the survey at the end of this webinar. We value your feedback. We want to know what you enjoyed about the webinar. What are your comments on how we can improve? We are always more than ready to make sure that we are continuously improving and that you're getting the best out of this course and these webinars. So with that being said, let's get started. Today's agenda, we're going to go through the construction industry today. We're going to look at the impact of construction, the mega trends affecting the future, some internal challenges that the industry is facing, but also how the industry is ready for transformation. We're going to talk about this transformation on 3 different levels or tiers. We're going to start with the company level and how companies can lead transformation. Then we're going to discuss the industry level and how that industry can drive the transformation forward. And then lastly, we're going to talk about the government and how the government can support this transformation. And under each one of those titles, we have a bunch of different methods and tools that the company, the industry, and the government can use in order to drive forward this transformation. Finally, we're going to talk about the path forward, the path ahead, and how each one of those tiers, be it the company, the industry, and the government, how each one of them has a role to play in this transformation moving forward. And then again, as always at the end, we're going to close it out with some questions and answers. So the construction industry today, I'm going to close I'm working on a remote internet connection today, so I'm going to shut down my video just to make sure that the voice is clear. And if there's any issues, please program support, let me know, and we'll deal with it accordingly. So the construction industry today, the impact of construction engineering on society, on the economy, and on the environment. To start with the society, construction is one of the first businesses that was ever developed by humankind. Ever since humans settled down and agriculture took place, people built homes and houses to shelter themselves. So construction, again, is one of the oldest industries out there. All other businesses rely on construction. Think about where you work, think about where you live, your house, think about the infrastructure that you use every day, be it from water, be it from transportation networks, be it electricity. All this is basically linked to the construction industry and the built environment. So also the industry defines the quality of life. So again, the things that I just mentioned, where you live, how you move between your work and your and your home. Everything is basically linked to the construction industry and to the built environment. And for example, we're going to talk about this more in the environment, but the quality of life, since we talked about it here, deals with also the quality of indoor air that you have inside your house. Deals with how effective it is to move from one place to the other. So again, transportation. Economy, the total annual revenue of around $10 trillion with regards to the construction industry. It provides an added value of $3.6 trillion. It accounts for about 6% of global GDP, gross domestic product. It has estimated revenue of about $15 trillion by 2025, according to studies. If advanced economies invest an extra 1% of GDP into construction, they would achieve a 1.5% increase in GDP within 4 years. That is according to the IMF in 2014. So again, think about the impact and the effects of this industry on your everyday life, on the global economy worldwide, and on the environment, which is the next thing we're going to talk about. So construction is the single largest global consumer of resources and raw materials, which is not necessarily a good thing, right? Around 50% of solid waste within the US comes from construction and demolition works. Buildings account for 25 to 40% of global energy use. Improving the quality of material and construction improves indoor environment, sustainability, and reduces costs. So again, even though this is not really a positive thing, this feeds into what we're going to talk about how the industry is transforming, how the industry should be transformed moving forward. and what are the opportunities out there for improving on the status quo that we have today. So mega trends affecting the future, we're going to talk about 4 different categories here: market and customer trends, resiliency and sustainability, workforce and society, politics and regulations. The first thing, market and customers, we have to think about demand, and specifically demand in developing countries. Studies reveal that 65% of the next decade's growth in construction will happen in emerging countries. Globalized markets. Engineering and one in two, so 50% of engineering and construction companies plan to move into new geographies. We're having bigger and more complex projects. There's a few examples here. We're having aging infrastructure. We discussed this in previous webinars. We have 1 in 3 bridges in Germany, 1 in 3 German railway bridges are more than 100 years old. And I know that in the United States, that's also the case. So how do we deal with this aging infrastructure? That's on top of other demands that are facing the industry, such as, we talked about this previously again, such as population growth, such as urbanization, and more people moving into the cities and having more stress on the existing infrastructure. We have massive financial need. We did talk about the infrastructure gap also in previous webinars. So here it says that $1 trillion in annual investments is needed to close the global infrastructure gap. So we want to think about all these things. We want to think about how these trends will affect the future of the industry. The next thing we want to talk about is sustainability and resilience. We have resource scarcity. Again, we talked about this in the previous slide, how the industry is the #1 consumer of raw materials, how the 50% of all waste ends up from the construction industry, the amount of energy that is consumed by the industry and how it affects climate change. And we talked about this also in previous webinars, the amount of natural disasters that we're seeing in the world now compared to 30 years ago. This is something that's very interesting that we haven't spoken about before, cyber threats. So 90% of firms agree that information controls have an impact on frontline employees. So this is, again, something very important to think about with regards to resiliency, with regards to the future safety of information, with regards to the industry in the future. Society and workforce, urbanization and housing crisis, health and comfort needs of citizens, talent and aging workforce. So 50% of general contractors are concerned about finding experienced craft workers for their workforce. So this, again, is workforce and society. How are we gonna think about it moving forward? Stakeholder pressure and organization, politics and how politicization of construction decision affects the industry. So an interesting example here is that in 2011, the government in Portugal canceled a 165-kilometer high-speed train line project because of austerity measures. So because that project wasn't the optimal decision to be made because of austerity, because of the economy, because of the public acceptance of the project. So that's how politics and the people as stakeholders play a significant role in this industry. And then lastly here, politics and regulations. We have complex regulatory environments. As an example here, 25 different procedures are required for a typical warehouse construction permit in India. So moving forward, we want to think about, for example, with regulations and permits, how can governments, and this is one of the roles that the government can take. So if you remember in the previous slide, we talked about the company level, we talked about the industry level, and we talked about the government level. So this might fall into the government level, right? How can the government play a role in streamlining the permitting process or streamlining regulatory processes while still maintaining strict health, safety, and environment measures, which are very important, and maintaining quality levels that should be maintained in any projects moving forward. Let me just check what we have in the chat box. There is a huge leap. All right. So I'm trying my best here to make sure that the internet connection, I put off my live video. I'm hoping that you can hear me. Great, okay, it's fine now. So keep me posted, please, program support, if there's any lag, and we'll deal with it accordingly. So again, as we were saying, is that the government can play a role and should play a role when it comes to regulation and permitting, and should play a role in streamlining the process to make sure that there's added value to the industry, that waste is being minimized, and that we attract people to the industry in a more effective way, so that we improve the added value to the industry. Great, thanks. All right, one thing I want to talk about here is geopolitical uncertainty. That always plays a role. Any company that wants to work in a specific region, one of the main things that they look at, or as a first step, they look at the stability in that country or in that specific region before they accept or to look into that project and spend money to come up with a bid or to come up with a design for that project. So stability, geopolitical stability is very important. Corruption is a very interesting concept also that is worth looking into. We have almost 50% of survey respondents believe that corruption is common in Western European construction market. I know firsthand that also it is very prevalent in developing regions. So that's something that doesn't attract companies to get into the field or to get into the industry. That is something that definitely needs to be considered as a next step, or as while looking into the future for this industry. Some of the internal challenges that the industry is facing today, and some of the things that we should consider when we want to look into the future of the industry and how we can improve it and how we can attract more labor experienced professionals to this industry. Lack of innovation and slow adoption of research and development, so low R&D. As we can see here on the figure on the right, if we want to compare the manufacturing or basically the manufacturing industry, which has increased its labor productivity from 1964 to 2012 by 153%, the construction industry, in retrospect, has decreased its productivity, its construction labor productivity over those 50 plus years. We have a decrease of 19%. So why is that the case? Right, and those are some things that we're looking into here for what are some potential problems that are causing this decrease in productivity over those years. So as we mentioned, lack of innovation, informal processes, and inadequate consistency in process execution. So as an example, companies often seem to put greater emphasis on defining the final product than on planning effectively how to actually construct a project or a specific process. We have weak transfer of knowledge from one project to another. So very few companies apply lessons learned. And if there is a database for lessons learned, it's not effectively communicated from one project to the other. So they're not effectively being utilized. We have insufficient project monitoring. We have limited data being collected and analyzed compared to the manufacturing operations. So if we think about this for a second, when you have a manufacturing operation, you are in a more safe environment. So if you compare a manufacturing plant compared to a project construction site. So in the manufacturing operations, you have more machines, you have more automated systems, you have more of a streamlined process with regards to input, output, what are the products that are being produced, what are the raw materials that are going in. The oversight over the process is much more efficient, and you can collect more information and data in a manufacturing process versus what is going on in a construction site, which is outdoors. And that's what we mean by limited data is collected in a construction environment. And when you don't have enough information being collected, you can't analyze that information, you can't improve processes, and you can't plan accordingly moving forward for the future. Minimal cross-functional cooperation. The most prevalent delivery method we've discussed is design, bid, build, so DBB. When we have that type of delivery method, we have a lack of coordination between different stakeholders. So we have the design stage or phase. the design people are going to be focusing on the design solely, and they're not going to be thinking, how can I improve the design so that it actually streamlines the bidding process or the construction process moving forward? So we have that disconnect between the different phases, and that also causes problems for the construction industry. Low collaboration with suppliers. We have ad hoc project-based purchasing strategy. So again, we don't have a purchasing strategy in place that would help us think about the overall construction process moving forward and the delivery of the entire project. So it kind of feeds into the segregation between the design, the bidding, and the construction of a project. We have a conservative company culture in this industry generally. So construction firms are not sufficiently progressive and forward-thinking. And that feeds into also the first concept of research and development of a long-term strategy or a long-term goal for this industry. We have shortage of new talent and people development. So as you can imagine, the construction industry is not a very attractive industry as compared to the finance industry, the manufacturing industry, the tech industry. And because of that, we have relatively low effective people development initiatives. We have inadequate gender diversity. We have low job security compared to other industries. So all these factors don't really actually contribute to people going elsewhere, or they don't contribute towards attracting people that are highly skilled and tech-oriented towards the construction industry. So those are some internal challenges that we should keep in mind when we want to think about how do we want to move forward with this industry? How do we want to improve? How do we want to make it more competitive? How do we want to improve people's lives? Because that's what this industry the goal of this industry should be. So with that in mind, let's discuss the transformation readiness of this industry. There's a lot of information again displayed here in this figure. I'm not going to go through them in detail, but please do go through this during your own time and reach out with any questions or any discussions that you want to have. So with regards to how ready the industry is for transformation, we want to look at from a society point of view, from an economic point of view, and also from an environmental point of view. There is a 1% reduction in global construction cost could save $100 billion annually. So think about how you can take that $100 billion and use it elsewhere to improve on the quality of life and to improve on society and the demands of the populations worldwide. From an economic point of view, we have an infrastructure gap, which is expected to be between 15 and $20 trillion by 2030. Now, closing that gap would create 100 million jobs and would generate $6 trillion per year in economic activity. So again, think about how if we can improve that gap or close that gap between what the public sector, the public funds that are available with governments to put into infrastructure improvements, to put into infrastructure resiliency, aging infrastructure, and new infrastructure to meet the demand of growing population and other demands that put stress on the infrastructure. So think about how much benefit we can gain from closing that gap. And one of the ways that we can do that, and we've discussed this briefly previously, is PPP, right? Public-private partnerships, where we have the private sector bringing in their capital or their equity or cash to close that gap and work together with the public sector to improve people's lives in the future and to also boost the construction industry. 30% of this boost to come from the asset operation enhancement. So that's a very interesting concept here. The industry is very focused on building projects, on providing ways in order to deliver projects. And then the prevalent idea here is that once the project is built, that's it, the job's over, we hand it over for operation, and the construction industry is no longer concerned with what happens. But the reality of this situation is very different. The cost of a project, if we think about it, let's say a project costs $10 million, and that's the end of that construction phase. You have an asset that costs you $10 million to build. The operation and maintenance of this asset over its entire life cycle, which is averaging 50 years, but as we previously saw in this webinar, some bridges are over 100 years old. So think about how much cost goes into and time goes into the operation and maintenance of this asset over 100 years, over 50 years. First of all, the estimate is that it would cost 10 times as much to operate and maintain it than it does to build it. So the 30% boost in the operation of this asset plays a huge factor and adds a significant value to this industry. And of course, you can apply it to any asset there. So be it a bridge, be it a power plant, be it a water treatment plant, the operation phase is much more impactful than the actual building of this asset. So again, a 30% boost of this could come from operation enhancement. From an environment point of view, the building sector can cost effectively achieve 30% reduction in energy consumption and attain energy savings, efficient energy savings. So again, not only to think about money and society, but also, of course, the environment, which in turn affects society and the economy. So all these are interlinked. That's why we want to think about them in with a holistic approach. Now we want to talk about the different tiers, the company level, the sector level, which is the industry level here, and then finally the government level. So as you can see, these are the actors or the stakeholders here on the left. And then on the right or on the top, let me just see here, there's a leg again. All right. So I'm just going to give it a minute here to make sure that I'm saying what you're looking at. So I'm looking at a slide which says transformation at 3 different levels. I do hope that program support and everybody online is seeing this. Okay, it's fine now, great. So we're looking at, on the left here, we're looking at the actors or the stakeholders, which are the 3 levels or the tiers that we discussed in the agenda. We have the company level, so the different companies and the contractors, the designers, the financiers, the clients, that would be the company level. The sector level, which is the industry overall. And then finally, we have the government level here, which are, of course, the public sector or the governments worldwide. Excuse me. On the top side here, we're looking at best practices. So what are the best practices that these 3 different tiers can use in order to help transform the industry moving forward? So from a company level, we want to look at technology, materials, and tools. We want to look at processes and operations. We also want to look at strategy and business model innovation. And finally, we're going to talk about people, organization, and culture. That's under the company level. Now, there's a lot to cover here. The ones that I have highlighted here in red are the ones that we have specific slides that we're going to delve into with more detail. Then after that, we're going to look into the sector, which is the industry level, and then the government level. So to start with, I want to look at advanced building and finishing materials, which is an example of how technology and material and tools can help us transform the industry. So companies leading transformation, we have advanced material and finishing materials. Now we have incremental innovation. So we start with innovation that could be achieved, for example, short term or now. And then at the end of the spectrum, we have radical transformation, where we have innovative materials with entirely new functions. From the incremental innovation, we have some advances. Okay, let me know when you can see the title Advanced Material and Finishing Materials, and I'll get started with that discussion. So we should be looking now, great. So with regards to advanced material and finishing material, we have incremental innovation at one side of the spectrum. So the minor steps that we can take. And then finally here we have radical innovation. So we have innovation materials with entirely new functions. So with regards to incremental innovation, we have advances on traditional materials and existing characteristics. One example would be Neopore, which is enhanced styropor. It offers up to 20% efficiency improvement in insulation, right? So one example on how we can provide products that would help drive the efficiency of the industry forward and how it could help in the transformation of the industry overall. We also have an example, which is new material combinations and multifunction characteristics. One interesting example here is self-healing concrete, which generates through the addition of bacterial spores. It's generated through the addition of bacteria, and it's estimated to reduce the lifetime cost of concrete by up to 50%, right? So that's, again, one way that we can transform one step forward or one minor change that transforms the industry. And as you know, concrete is a very, very important raw material in this, or let's say material in this industry. One more radical, innovative change is, let's say rain absorbing roof mats, which imitates the process of perspiration and considerably reduces air conditioning costs. So here we're talking about operation, we're talking about maintenance, because this has to do with air conditioning costs and not with the actual construction of the asset. So that's something that's very interesting. We always want to keep in mind that transformation doesn't only occur during the construction or the bidding or the design phase. Rather, there's a big leap forward that can be considered for the operation and maintenance of a project. We also now want to look into semi-automated construction equipment. So the development or the deployment of new construction equipment and how that can lead to the one step forward towards the transformation of the industry. So having these new construction equipment, they can help improve availability of individual equipment. They can enhance the utilization of a company's entire fleet, and they can help use the equipment in a more efficient way across different companies. One example here is continuous monitoring and preventive maintenance and repair of construction equipment in a better availability of individual equipment. So one specific example here is that Volvo Construction Equipment has launched a program based on machine tracking information system that aims to identify problems before they occur, improving equipment uptime. So instead of waiting for a piece of equipment to break down or for it to require some sort of repair, they've come up with a program that basically tracks the information that the machine is providing them, and they can basically have a preventive measure in order to detect if a specific piece of equipment requires some sort of attention or repair before it actually breaks down. That would help keep the equipment active and would increase or improve equipment uptime. So again, when we think about the construction industry and we provide these examples, you might think that they're very detailed changes or improvements, but that's exactly what we want to improve in order to have a significant impact on the construction industry overall, because it's these minor changes that add up and lead to an impactful transformation overall on an industry level. And this is something that when I first started reading and researching and learning about these changes, I, for one, started thinking about, okay, this is very small change and this is not really going to have a huge impact. But as you read and as you do more research and as you get more experience and exposure to the industry, you realize how it's actually these small changes that are incremental and that lead to the transformation of the entire industry worldwide. So another thing I want to talk about under technology, material, and tools is digital technologies and big data, and how big data is very important along the value chain of the industry. So digital technologies along the value chain, we want to think about the entire process of construction, again, design and engineering, I think there's a lag, so I'll just give it a second here. Okay. So I'm currently looking at digital technologies along the value chain. So we want to look at how digital technologies can affect the entire value chain of the construction industry. When we talk about the value chain, we're talking about the entire, all the phases that a project or that an asset goes through. from planning to design and engineering to construction, and then finally to operation, maintenance, and the end of the project. So we want to see how digital technologies affects the entire value chain. When we talk about digital technologies, we're talking about big data analytics. We're talking about simulation and virtual reality. We're talking about mobile interfaces and augmented reality. So these are user interfaces and applications. We also have software, platform, and control. So some of the softwares that are out there include building information modeling, BIM. So of course, we've talked about this, and the course material goes in depth with regards to building information modeling, ubiquitous connectivity and tracking. And then we also want to talk about digital and physical integration layers. So we have 3D scanning, we have unmanned aerial vehicles known as drones, we have embedded sensors and the Internet of Things. So under the embedded sensors, for example, how can we use, for example, climate control or humidity control or lighting sensors? How can these different sensors speak to one another through a integrated system to improve on indoor air environment? So you want to work in a healthy environment, you want to live and sleep in a healthy environment. How can all these different features transform this environment in the future? So these are very intense and heavy topics, but they're very important when we want to look at how the industry is transforming, how the industry is improving, and what's the future of the industry moving forward. So cybersecurity here is always something that we should take into consideration, because we're talking about gathering information, we're talking about controlling that information, making sure that it's secure, because at the end, some of that information is sensitive, and having that information breached would cause a significant problem. And integration of technology is always important throughout the life cycle of any industry. So again, there's so much information presented here. I'm going to touch upon just briefly a few titles, and please do look into this in more detail at your own time. I try to provide as much information as possible so that I can keep you excited and thinking about what are all the different topics that the research out there is telling us that we need in order to transform the industry. This cannot be covered definitely within 60 minutes or 45 minutes. I will provide you at the end of this webinar with also the main research articles that I use for this information so that you can read it at your own time. And again, that hopefully will trigger questions, will trigger your interest to continue learning and researching about this moving forward. So digital technologies along the value chain, a continuation here. We want to look at the different phases, the design and engineering phase, the construction phase, and the operation phase. So we have under the design and engineering, we want to integrate data from laser scanning, for example. We want to have data repository for analytics and optimized design. We want to have model inputs to stimulation and rapid prototyping, data delivery integration for performance analysis. And as you can see here, there's a visualization as to how this is a continuous life cycle, how technology impacts every single one of those stages in a project. So the ones that I just mentioned are impact design and engineering, but also in the construction phase, we want to talk about how data exchange with project management tool is very important. We want to consider model inputs for prefabrication and additive manufacturing. So one very important way to improve the efficiency of construction is to have it be more of a manufacturing process, and that would include prefabrication. That would include 3D modeling or 3D printing. And that all feeds into building information modeling, because having that model in place would allow you to prefabricate different parts of a building or of an asset off-site. That would ensure safety, that would improve quality, that would improve sometimes cost, because you have it in a more controlled environment. And that would speed up the construction phase, because when you have ready pieces of equipment or ready pieces of the building ready for a quick installation, that would definitely improve schedule and it would definitely impact the bottom line of the project and then impact the industry overall. Real-time data sharing, integration, and coordination is always very important. Data exchange with construction monitoring and surveillance tools. Again, this is all how BIM impacts the entire life cycle of a project and improves on the important metrics of the construction industry, be it from a society point of view, a environmental point of view, and of course, from a economic point of view. The last phase of an asset is its operation phase. Building information support for renovation and termination of a project. Data platform for condition monitoring and predictive maintenance. We talked about predictive maintenance also with regards to equipment in previous slides. So you can also implement that on an entire asset for operation maintenance. You can save on maintenance costs. You can save on downtime, because when you have an asset, that asset is usually generating revenue. So sometimes having the need for repair or maintenance impacts the revenue stream of that asset. So when you have the data needed to have predictive maintenance, you definitely improve on revenue for that asset. Data repository for facility and asset management systems, and platform for virtual handover and commissioning. So we want to always keep, I know there's a lot of information, but we always want to think big picture and keep that in mind. We always, when we talk about transforming the industry, we want to make it more efficient. We want to make it more attractive. We want to make it more attractive financially for people to be interested to invest equity and cash in this industry. So all this technological advancement that we see, this technological transformation, that's the end goal here. That's to have the industry be more attractive, be it from an employment perspective, from an investment point of view, from a technological point of view, and of course, at the end, have it provide a more sustainable and environmentally friendly and high quality level of life for us as people. As a next step, we want to talk about how, on a company level, on an industry level, how can companies overall help through strategy and business model innovation. So we have, as a next step, we want to talk about sustainability. How can sustainable products with optimal life cycle value improve and transform the industry from a strategy and business model innovation perspective? Because there's a lag here, I'm going to give it a minute, and we'll continue. But as we wait for the slide to be in front of you, I'm talking here as a next step about front-loaded and cost-conscious design and project planning. We did talk about this previously. So any project will go through the different steps of planning, of design, of build or construction, and then operation. So if we shift any changes that we make to the early planning stage, we shift the modifications and we do earlier planning of the phases, that's really where we can implement those changes most efficiently. That's where changes can be implemented without significant cost added, without significant delays to the schedule. So that's one way or one strategy that we should always keep in mind and implement in order to keep the industry more efficient and streamlined. As you can see here from the visual in front of you, the frequency of changes in traditional processes is mostly done during the building, the construction phase, rather than we can see that through the gray curve here. This is where most of the changes happen. And as you can see, this is not the optimal way or the strategy or approach that should be considered by the different stakeholders. We want to push those changes. We want to shift them to the beginning of the planning stage, where we can implement them more effectively from a cost perspective and from a schedule perspective. Because as we can see, with time, or as the different phases progress, the cost of changes significantly increase moving forward. And that, of course, affects the project and the industry worldwide. Okay, I'm going to wait for this slide to boot here. As a next step, we're talking about innovative contracting models with balanced risk sharing. So we want to, again, this is from a business model perspective. How can we transform the industry on a company level? So a project's culture, or even as a company's culture, tendering and contract, we want to have incentive mechanisms in place, and we want to think about conflict resolution. So from a project culture or a company culture point of view, we want to make sure that the project charter, which is the first piece of document that is put together in order to identify the project's goals. And we want to make sure that those goals are common between different stakeholders. We want to have transparent financials, so open books. We want to have big rooms where we have co-location of teams, and teams can collaborate from one another and have that cross collaboration between the different teams and across the different phases of the project. And we want to have common data platform, and this is what we discussed with regards to technology, with regards to building information modeling. With regards to tendering and contract, we want to choose the most efficient and not the cheapest contract and delivery method. And we talked about this in the previous webinar. We want to have multi-party contract with clear accountabilities. We want to have early involvement of key participants, to have people make decisions early on. As we saw in the previous slide, having those decisions made early on affects the project from a cost and schedule perspective. We want to have incentive mechanisms in place, such as alternative cost models, such as target cost. We want to have cost optimization be a significant target. We also want to have a shared risk and reward, pain and share gain system with regards to delivery methods, with regards to types of contracts. That is very important. Finally, this is very important, conflict resolution. This industry is filled with legal battles the lawyers, of course, love this, but this is very destructive to the industry, be it from a schedule perspective, because many projects are put on hold due to legal matters and due to legal conflicts between different stakeholders. So there's a lot of money being spent and a lot of delay and wasted effort that goes, that happens because of conflict resolution in this industry. So in order to overcome these challenges, we have to always think about collaborative decision-making and control tactics. We always want to have internal dispute resolution should be resolved in negotiation and should be done effectively and quickly, instead of going to court and going through these prolonged legal battles. One way to think about how we can improve this is having third-party mediation and conciliation, which usually speeds things up and leads more effectively to a resolution between conflicting parties. And we want to have decisions by an arbitrator or an adjudicator. Again, this speeds things moving forward. But overall, we want to find ways to limit conflict resolution. Next, we want to talk about on a sector level or an industry level. We want to talk about industry collaboration through mutual consent and standards across industry, more data exchange and benchmarking and best practice sharing. We can have cross-industry collaboration along the value chain. Those are some ways where industry collaboration can really help transform the industry moving forward. So that's industry collaboration. The next thing that we should also consider is joint industry marketing. So industry-wide collaboration on employer marketing. We want to make this industry more attractive. We want to attract these people that have specific skills, be it technological, be it labor. We want to make this industry more attractive. So that's one way, is to have joint marketing on the sector level. We want to have coordinated communication with civil society, and we'll talk in more detail about that. We also want to have effective interaction with the public sector. So one way for companies to lead transformation, I'll give it a few seconds here just to make sure that we're looking at the same slide. There's a lag. So one way is to have lean and safe construction management and operations. And this leads into a concept of Six Sigma. which basically means that we want, as we can see here in front of us, we have alignment of resources and material and info and information flow. So we have value creation flow, that's what it's called. We also want to have coordination and harmonization of takt speed. So we have synchronized scheduling. You want the material to reach the site when exactly you need it. You want one activity to start exactly when the one before it has finished. So you want to have that efficiency and harmonization and coordination between the different tasks in a project. Just in time pull of resources and materials, you want to cut down on inventory. Inventory uses space, inventory costs money, inventory is inefficient. So you want just in time resources to arrive to the construction site or to start taking part in a project just when you need it, rather than stacking up an inventory, which costs money, which leads to inefficiency. And you want to always have the culture and the processes in place to have a continuous improvement of your processes and having improvement of quality. You want to have always feedback. So just like in this course, we are always asking for your feedback via surveys. In the construction industry, and just like any other industry, you should always stress on that information, feedback coming back, and that continuous improvement being considered and being looked at in order to stay competitive and to stay on top of what's happening and to continuously improve and transform this industry moving forward. Otherwise, you're not going to survive. Competition will eat you up, just like every industry. And we want to, of course, prevent that. And continuous improvement is a very important concept that should always be taken into consideration. Next thing I want to talk about is sustainable products with optimal life cycle value. There's a lag here, so I'll give it a second. But even if you're not looking at this, it's fine. Sustainable products with optimal life cycle value. We always want to consider that less than 1/3 of construction and demolition waste is currently recovered. So there's a lot of opportunity here for transformation with regards to this aspect. How can we think about improving this? Currently, construction and demolition waste, we have 70 to 80% discarded. Recycled and reused is only 20 to 30%. So if we blow up that picture of 70 to 80% discarded, we're looking at 40% of lumber, 14% of asphalt products, 11% of soil, 11% of concrete. So much of this material could be recovered and we can use them in different ways, such as fertilizer additives, such as gravel, to help prevent erosion or erosion control. For reusing after treatment, we can use them for road building materials. There have been some very interesting concepts on how we can use plastic, for example, recycled plastic to actually pave roads instead of asphalt. Wooden flooring materials can be used to recycle lumber, for example. So those are some very interesting ways, very specific, but yet interesting ways where we can help transform the industry. Other ways, I'm going to go faster here because we're limited on time and we have a lot to cover. Internationalization strategy for increased sales. We want to also think about the life cycle or the value chain of the industry. So we have building materials, we have construction, we have services, we have operation maintenance, which includes repairs, maintenance, reusing, redistribution, and then recycling. So we always want to look at the entire value chain of the industry and see how certain outputs or certain waste from one stage of the industry can help or can be inputs to regenerate building materials and have them put back into the value chain as new building materials, rather than discarding them or having them destroy the environment, or even not just the environment. Recycling, of course, has added value from a cost point of view. We also want to think about energy recovery, how we can save on energy in operation maintenance, and how we can prevent materials from going to landfills, and which could be definitely minimized to help save the environment. I'm going to give it a second here because I'm going through the slides quickly and I know it's a lag. But the next topic I want to discuss is strategic workforce planning and smart hiring enhanced. Yep, I'll give it a second. So we were talking about strategic workforce planning, smart hiring, enhanced retention. How can we, again, the concept of attracting people to this industry, also keeping these people within the industry. So if you're any contractor or company, you want to hang on to these valuable employees, people that have become experienced and have come to know the industry, have come to know the inner workings of your company. You want to have that retention capability. Otherwise, again, competition is going to eat you up. Other industries are going to attract these people, so that we're going to have them as an industry, as a construction industry. We're going to lose on that experience and that added value that those people can bring to the industry. So as you can see here is that the average age over time from 1985 to 2014 in the construction industry has increased to 43 from 36. So because of that aging population within the industry, we want to make sure that we are hiring correctly, we are able to train and keep that workforce up to speed with the technology, and we want to make sure that we can have that retention and keep those people with us as time moves forward. Because if we don't, we're going to lose out on them, and that's definitely going to impact the bottom line, and impact the industry's productivity and efficiency. Next, I want to discuss coordinated communication with civil society. And that really is important, and that's from a company perspective. So continuous monitoring of relevant development in society and politics. The industry and the companies in general have specialized people on board to always look at what's happening on a society and political perspective, because that is very impactful to the industry. We want to always have unbiased analysis of the situation. We have studies that take place, that study societal trends, that understand political stakeholders' interest, and that do scenario analysis, which means that we want to analyze, if we do this project, is it going to be accepted by the society? Is it going to be something that is embraced? Is it something that's going to be, if we build a bridge and nobody's crossing that bridge, then that's a failed project. That's something that doesn't produce revenue. That's something that leads to a financial loss. So we always want to have these studies in place to understand what are the demands from the political environment, from a society point of view, what are the priorities there before we participate in any project from a company perspective and also from an industry perspective. And that also is done by coordinating efforts with the government or with the public sector. So unbiased analysis, we also want to have development of target regulation. So implication of several scenarios, development of realistic vision of regulation from the industry point of view. So here it is the responsibility of the companies and of the industry to to coordinate with the government to say, these regulations will really help us improve or transform the industry and keep it competitive. And because when it's competitive, it can keep up with the demand of the population, of the aging infrastructure, and that definitely leads to successful governance. So you can see here how there is an overlap between the interests of the government and of the industry. And that's really where we should focus our efforts to coordinate further and make sure that we can transform this industry to meet the needs of society and to meet the needs of the industry, the technology that's being pushed forward by other sectors, other industries in the business world, and also to make sure that government governance is successful to meet the demands of the population, of course. Development of advocacy strategy. This also means that we're working with the governments to come up with the best strategy and to partner up with them to lead to that success. Now, the path ahead, the role of each tier, and I'm wrapping up here, and I'll leave, we have 5 minutes left. Hopefully you have some questions. The role of each tier from a company perspective, companies should assess the opportunities inherent in new technologies and materials, and then adjust their processes, operations, and even business models accordingly. If companies structure their organization optimally, they stand the best chance of success when implementing opportunities on a large scale. From an industry point of view, the industry should enhance coordination and cooperation across the value chain and agree on common goals and standards. The industry, again, needs to work collectively with all stakeholders along with multiple dimensions to gain the support of society. From a government point of view, the government should create a fertile environment for the transformation of the engineering and construction industry or sector. So there's a lot of overlap here because the companies together make up the industry, and the industry collectively has to coordinate with the government to make sure that that regulations that govern the industry generally are adjusted, are continuously looked at and revised in order to meet the upcoming or the future demands of the industry, of society, of technological change. This is an ongoing changing environment, and if there isn't a lot of effort and research put in place in order to continuously keep up with this change, this industry won't survive. So I hope that this webinar gave you a crash course, because I know that there's a lot of information, gave you a crash course with how the industry is transforming and how the industry will continue to transform in the future, and what are the different ways that, or what are the different ideas that you should keep in mind when you consider this change moving forward from a personal point of view, from a company perspective, an entire industry perspective, and from a public sector or a government perspective. I hope that you came up with the conclusion that these three entities need to work together consistently, share information, share technologies, and effectively collaborate to continue being successful and to meet the needs of the future moving forward. If you have any questions, I'm going to stick around. I do apologize for the lag in audio today. I am working remotely and I do not have a wired internet connection. I am more than ready to stay behind and answer any questions, no matter how long it takes. And of course, as always, I'm always available. You can reach me with any questions or comments that you have via inbox or otherwise. If you have any questions, program support also can relay them to me. And I'm more than ready to answer any questions. This is the main reference that I used, or the main report that I used, which is from the World Economic Forum. It's called Shaping the Future of Construction, a Breakthrough in Mindset and Technology, which was prepared in collaboration with the Boston Consulting Group. So I do encourage you, it's about 65 pages long. I do encourage you to read that at your own time. Hopefully that will also stimulate and prompt some questions, which again, I'm more than ready and I'm very available to answer them or to have that conversation with you. So again, thank you for joining us. Please make sure that you complete the survey at the end of this webinar. If you have any questions, please include them in the chat box, and I will be here for the next couple of minutes to answer them. For anyone that wants to jump off, thank you for joining us again. And please, this will be our final webinar, so please keep in touch via LinkedIn or otherwise. I'm always happy to keep in touch with my participants and have interesting conversations, hopefully in the future. So any questions, please provide them. And thank you again for joining us. Have a great day or evening, wherever you are. All right. I see that we have no questions from our participants. Adriano, Eric, Jackie, Pedrick, thank you for joining me. Any questions you have? I know this was an intense crash course. I do apologize for any inconvenience due to the audio. But please, I do encourage you to look at this more in depth and in detail at your own time. Go through the slides again, go through that reference that I provided, and please reach out if you have any questions. I would love to hear from you. I would love to have that conversation. I see that there's no questions, so I'll give it another minute before I end this session. Thank you again, everyone, for joining me, and keep in touch. All right. Thank you, everyone.